why you keep attracting the wrong people, and how to break the cycle. Can I ask you something? Have you ever looked back at your life and realized that different people somehow gave you the same pain? Different names, different faces, different relationships, but somehow, the ending was almost identical. Maybe you keep attracting people who lie. People who disappear without explanation. People who only call when they need something. People who make you feel like you're never enough. And every time it happens, you make yourself the same promise. Next time will be different. But then, a few months later, you're sitting in the same emotional position, asking yourself the same painful question. Why does this always happen to me? If you've ever asked that question, I want you to hear this before we go any further. You're not cursed, you're not impossible to love, and you're probably not attracting the wrong people by accident. In fact, psychology tells us something that most people never realize. We don't just attract people, we also choose them. Not always consciously, but emotionally. And that's where the real story begins. Before you panic, no, I'm not blaming you. There's a huge difference between causing someone's bad behavior and repeatedly allowing unhealthy patterns into your life. Imagine this. You move into a house. A few weeks later, rain starts leaking through the roof. You repair the ceiling. Months later, another leak appears. You repair it again. Eventually, you realize the problem isn't the ceiling, it's the roof. That's how many people approach relationships. They fix the symptoms. They never inspect the pattern. You tell yourself, I just have bad luck. There are no good people anymore. Everyone cheats. Nobody is genuine. But what if that's not the full story? What if your heart has become familiar with certain behaviors, even when those behaviors hurt you? That sounds strange, doesn't it? Why would anyone become comfortable with pain? Let's explore that together. Have you ever noticed that people often say things like, I don't know why, but I just felt an instant connection, or I can't explain it. There was just chemistry. Chemistry is real. But here's something that surprised psychologists. Sometimes what we call chemistry is actually familiarity. Think about that for a second. Your brain is designed to recognize what feels familiar, not necessarily what is healthy. If someone grew up in a peaceful home where disagreements ended with calm conversations, they'll often feel safe around emotionally mature people. But imagine someone who grew up in constant shouting, or emotional neglect, or unpredictable affection. Their nervous system becomes used to emotional instability. So years later, when they meet someone calm, respectful, and emotionally available, they might say, something is missing. Not because the relationship lacks love, but because it lacks chaos. And chaos has become familiar. Have you ever heard someone say, they're too nice? Sometimes that's not a compliment. Sometimes it's a sign that peace feels unfamiliar. Let me tell you about someone we'll call Sarah. Sarah was intelligent, kind, hardworking. She genuinely loved people. But every relationship left her heartbroken. Her friends couldn't understand it, because every time Sarah met someone new, they would say, this one is different. At first, everything seemed wonderful. Then little things started happening. He'd cancel plans at the last minute, disappear for days, apologize, promise to change, become affectionate again, then repeat the cycle. Eventually, the relationship would end. Sarah cried, healed, moved on, and somehow, the next man looked completely different. Different job, different personality, different background. But after a few months, the pattern returned. Different person. Same emotional experience. It wasn't until Sarah spoke with a counselor that something clicked. The counselor asked a simple question. How did love feel when you were growing up? Sarah paused. For the first time, she realized something she'd never connected before. As a child, love always felt uncertain. Some days there was warmth. Other days there was distance. Affection depended on performance. Approval had to be earned. Without realizing it, Sarah had spent years mistaking emotional inconsistency for love. Not because she wanted pain, but because pain felt familiar. Maybe you know someone like Sarah. Maybe that someone is you. Here's something I wish more people talked about. Healthy relationships can actually feel boring, not because they are boring, because they're peaceful. Think about movies. Most romantic movies don't begin with two emotionally mature people communicating well. They begin with drama, conflict, misunderstandings, mixed signals, grand emotional highs, then emotional lows. We've been trained to associate emotional intensity with love. But intensity and intimacy are not the same thing. Someone making your heart race doesn't automatically mean they're right for you. Sometimes your heart is racing because your nervous system senses uncertainty, and uncertainty creates obsession. Be honest. Have you ever picked up your phone, put it down, picked it up again, check to see if they replied, even though you knew they hadn't. Then suddenly, your phone vibrates. Your heart jumps. You smile, only to realize it's your bank or your network provider. We've all laughed at moments like that. But there's actually something fascinating happening inside your brain. When affection becomes unpredictable, your brain starts chasing the next emotional reward. It's similar to why people keep pulling the lever on a slot machine, not because they always win, but because they win just often enough to keep hoping. Healthy love doesn't keep you addicted. Healthy love keeps you secure. So if the problem isn't simply that there are bad people in the world, then what determines who we keep letting into our lives? The answer lies much deeper than personality. It begins with something psychologists call our emotional blueprint, and once you understand it, you may never look at relationships the same way again. Have you ever walked into someone's house and immediately known where the kitchen was? Nobody had to tell you. You just knew. Why? Because after visiting enough houses, your brain begins to recognize patterns. Relationships work in a similar way. Long before you knew what love was, before you had your first crush, before you ever held someone's hand, your mind was already learning. It was watching, listening, recording. Every argument, every apology, every hug, every cold shoulder, every "I'm proud of you," every "you're never good enough." Like a silent camera, your brain collected thousands of moments and quietly asked one question. So, this is what love looks like? And without realizing it, that answer became your emotional blueprint. Now let me be clear. I'm not saying your childhood determines your future. It doesn't. But it often explains your starting point. And knowing your starting point is powerful because you can choose a different destination. Can I tell you something that might surprise you? Most people don't miss red flags. They explain them away. Think about it. Your friend says, "He insulted me, but he was just having a bad day. She keeps disappearing for days, but she's just busy. He gets jealous because he really loves me. She checks my phone because she cares." Have you noticed how creative we become when we're trying not to lose someone? We become lawyers, defending behavior we would never accept if it happened to someone we love. If your younger sister came to you and said, "He screams at me every week," would you tell her, "Give him another chance, I'm sure he'll change"? Probably not. So why is it so easy to protect other people, but so difficult to protect ourselves? Sometimes it's because we're not afraid of losing them. We're afraid of being alone. And those are two very different fears. Let's be honest for a moment. Loneliness can be loud. It whispers things that aren't true. Maybe this is the best you'll ever get. You're getting older. Nobody else will love you. At least they stayed. Have you ever noticed that people rarely make their best decisions when they're desperate? Someone who's dying of thirst will drink water from almost anywhere, even if it's dirty. Not because they enjoy dirty water, because desperation changes judgment. The same thing can happen emotionally. When we're starving for love, we may accept crumbs simply because they're offered. But listen carefully. Attention is not affection. Someone texting you every day doesn't necessarily respect you. Someone buying you expensive gifts doesn't automatically value you. Someone saying, "I love you," doesn't mean they're prepared to love you well. Real love is measured over time, not in emotional speeches, but in consistent actions. I wish someone had told me this years ago. Chemistry gets you excited. Compatibility helps you stay. They're not the same thing. Chemistry says, "We can't stop talking." Compatibility says, "We can solve problems together." Chemistry says, "I've never felt this way before." Compatibility says, "I feel safe being myself." Chemistry can happen in one conversation. Compatibility is revealed over months. That's why rushing relationships is dangerous. Time reveals what excitement hides. Think about fruit. You can paint an apple to make it look beautiful, but only time will tell whether it's fresh inside. People are the same. Character doesn't appear during the honeymoon phase. It appears during disappointment, during disagreement, during inconvenience. Watch how someone treats people who can't benefit them. Watch how they respond when you say no. Watch how they behave when life doesn't go their way. That's where character speaks the loudest. Let me tell you something about David. Not the David from the Bible, just an ordinary man. David had one rule. He always fell in love quickly. His friends warned him every single time, "Slow down," but he wouldn't listen. Within weeks he was talking about forever, buying expensive gifts, canceling plans with friends, making one person the center of his universe. And every relationship ended the same way. One day, after another painful breakup, he said something that changed everything. He said, "I don't think I was falling in love with the person. I was falling in love with the idea that I finally wouldn't be alone." That sentence hit me, because many of us don't fall in love with reality. We fall in love with potential. We imagine who someone could become. Instead of paying attention to who they are today, potential is beautiful, but relationships are built on reality. Can I ask you another question? When was the last time you disappointed someone because you chose to protect your peace? Many people can't answer that, because they've spent years making everyone else comfortable, even when it costs them emotionally. Here's the truth. If saying no makes someone stop respecting you, they never respected your boundaries in the first place. Healthy people don't punish healthy boundaries. They appreciate them. Imagine buying a beautiful house. Would you leave every door unlocked? Would you tell strangers, "Come in whenever you like"? Of course not. Not because you're rude, because what is valuable deserves protection. Your heart is no different. Boundaries are not walls that keep love out. They're gates that let the right people in. One thing I admire about Jesus is that he loved everyone, but he didn't give everyone the same level of access. Think about that. He spoke to crowds. He ministered to many. But he had 12 close disciples. Within those 12, he had 3 who walked with him during some of his most personal moments. Even perfect love practiced healthy boundaries. That's something many of us overlook. Loving people doesn't require unlimited access. Sometimes wisdom says, "I forgive you," but it also says, "I can't trust you with the same access you once had." Forgiveness heals your heart. Boundaries protect it. Because here's the truth. Changing the people in your life isn't where transformation begins. Transformation begins when you become the kind of person who no longer feels at home in unhealthy relationships. And that's exactly where we're going next. Can I tell you something that took me a long time to understand? Healing doesn't just change your life, it changes who you're attracted to. At first, that sounds strange. After all, if someone is attractive, they're attractive. Right? Not exactly. Have you ever gone back to watch a movie you loved as a child, only to wonder, why did I think this was so amazing? Or tasted a snack you couldn't live without years ago, and now it barely impresses you? You changed. Your tastes matured. Your perspective grew. The movie didn't change. Relationships work the same way. When you grow emotionally, people who once seemed irresistible may no longer feel appealing. Not because they're bad people, but because you're no longer looking for the same things. Let me paint a picture. Imagine you've spent years living beside a busy highway. Cars pass every minute. Horns blare. Engines roar. At first, the noise is unbearable. But after a while, you stop noticing it. Your brain adapts. Now imagine moving to a quiet countryside. The first night feels uncomfortable. It's too quiet. You almost miss the noise. Not because the noise was good, because it became normal. Many people experience this in relationships. If you've spent years surrounded by drama, mixed signals, emotional games, and constant conflict, peace can feel unfamiliar. You may even mistake peace for boredom, but peace isn't boring. It's healthy. A relationship doesn't need constant emotional fireworks to be meaningful. Sometimes the strongest love is the one that allows you to breathe. Can I challenge an idea that has become very popular? People often ask, how do I find the right person? It's not a bad question, but I think there's a better one. Am I becoming the right person? Because here's what often happens. We make long lists. I want someone loyal, someone honest, someone emotionally mature, someone who communicates. Those are wonderful qualities. But then we rarely ask, am I becoming those things too? Healthy relationships are not built by one healthy person carrying an unhealthy one. They're built when two people are both committed to growing. You can't expect honesty while hiding your feelings. You can't expect respect while ignoring your own boundaries. You can't expect consistency if you're inconsistent yourself. Growth is attractive, not because it makes you perfect, but because it makes you intentional. Can I give you a simple exercise? Not something complicated, just a conversation. The next time someone enters your life and you feel that instant excitement, pause. Before you ask, do they like me? Ask yourself these questions. How do I feel after spending time with them? Do you feel peaceful or confused? Do you feel respected or anxious? Can you be yourself? Or are you constantly trying to impress them? Do they bring out your best qualities or your deepest insecurities? Or confused? Do you feel respected or anxious? Can you be yourself, or are you constantly trying to impress them? Do they bring out your best qualities or your deepest insecurities? Those questions are more important than butterflies, because butterflies can appear in beautiful gardens and in dangerous places. This one might sting a little. Have you ever heard someone say, "I know they'll change"? Maybe you've said it yourself. Hope is a beautiful thing, but hope becomes dangerous when it's used to ignore reality. Don't build your future on promises that haven't become patterns. If someone tells you they're committed, but their actions constantly say otherwise, believe the actions. If someone says they value communication but disappears every time there's conflict, believe the actions. Words introduce people. Behavior reveals them. One of the greatest acts of self-respect is believing what someone's consistent behavior is showing you, even when it's painful. Here's something I wish every young person understood. Walking away isn't always giving up. Sometimes it's growing up. There are relationships you don't need to fix, arguments you don't need to win, people you don't need to convince. Not every door deserves another knock. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is quietly leave with your dignity intact. That doesn't mean becoming bitter. It means recognizing that love without respect eventually becomes emotional exhaustion. One of my favorite verses about relationships isn't actually about romance. It's found in Proverbs 13:20. Walk with the wise and become wise, for a companion of fools suffers harm. Notice what it doesn't say. It doesn't say wisdom is contagious from a distance. It says walk with. The people closest to you influence your thinking, your habits, your confidence, and even your future. That's why choosing relationships is one of the most spiritual decisions you'll ever make. Another verse that speaks deeply to this is 2 Corinthians 6:14, where we're reminded not to be unequally yoked. While it's often applied to marriage, the principle is broader. Deep partnerships require shared values, shared direction, and mutual commitment. Love grows best where there is both affection and alignment. Maybe you've made mistakes. Maybe you've trusted people who hurt you. Maybe you've ignored every warning sign. Maybe you're listening to this after another painful ending. If that's you, I want you to hear this. Your past explains you. It doesn't imprison you. Every emotionally healthy person you admire started somewhere. Growth begins the moment you become willing to learn, not the moment you become perfect. The cycle ends when awareness becomes action. So, let me ask you one last question. What if the next chapter of your life doesn't begin with meeting someone new? What if it begins with meeting a healthier version of yourself? The version that no longer confuses attention with love. The version that no longer apologizes for healthy boundaries. The version that chooses peace over chaos. The version that knows its worth isn't determined by who stays or who leaves. Because here's the truth. When you heal, your standards change. When your standards change, your choices change. When your choices change, your relationships change. And sometimes, the greatest relationship you'll ever build is the one you have with yourself and with God. Everything else grows stronger from there. If this conversation helped you see yourself differently, don't keep it to yourself. Share it with someone who needs the reminder that healthy love doesn't begin with finding the perfect person. It begins with becoming whole. Welcome to Mentivo, where we don't just study the human mind, we learn how to transform it. I'll see you in the next conversation.